Deoxy, what?
Right on the way back.
Yeah, you already knew. I was giving them the tips. See if they learned anything this morning.
I knew the other half, nucleic acid, but I didn't.
You got the nucleic acid part?
The NA. I didn't know I forgot what the DA was.
Yeah. On my recent trip to Oregon, I got to spend a week having to look at this. Isn't that horrible?
Terrible.
Yeah. What I saw was incredible. And there's nothing quite like a mountain range, because these mountains run from California to Canada. Over 700 miles of a mountain range. And this is just a small taste of what the real picture looks like. But in this 700 miles, those mountains were formed by volcanoes. And you can stop and look at Mount Rainier, which is the tallest, over 14,000 feet. How many feet are we right here?
Zero.
No, we're above zero.
Sea level.
Maybe.
Sea level.
Any idea? In other words, nobody knows. But we're low. We're a long way from 14,000 feet. And the air up there is quite different. So you can go from Mount Rainier to Mount Hood. And then you go a little further and you can see Mount Shasta. And a little further you can see Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens looks a little different than the others right now. Any guesses to why? Because it learned to vape. Mount St. Helens is vaping. And the incredible thing is many years ago, when I flew to Oregon, Mount St. Helens looked, when I went, like all those others, beautiful white peaks. When I flew out, this is what I saw. All the snow was melted because the heat was so intense. And that rascal was burping up clouds of all kinds of things. And the cool part of my story, when I was in Oregon working with university students, I worked with students who were doing research. And one of the things they were researching was how quickly, like insects, little animals come back to situations like this. I actually got to go with some of those students and spend a couple of nights camped in the cauldron. It was like being on the moon. It was incredible. So, incredible views that God's created. And I was reminded one day as we crossed the Cascade Mountains, we went from the east side to the west side, there's a very common sight. And this is what the common sight is. Any guess what that is? You see them around here, but the logs are this big around. Believe it or not, that's less than one tree. The trees are humongous. And this tree right here was probably about 150 years old. So it was being logged by men who were not nearly that age, that were planted a long time ago by somebody else. And these massive logs go down through these log trucks to the mills that produce the lumber that we use for building. And I remember when we lived there, I saw what I thought at first was a horrible sight, and that was huge areas in the mountains that were bare. Right, Juan Antonio? There you go. And when I saw that, it was like, how horrible. All the trees are gone. But all those trees are harvested for a purpose and in a time. And believe it or not, if I were doing it, I would have taken like every other tree and left, a forest. But this is what's called clear cutting. And I don't have time to explain it, but it's the best way that's been established to re-establish forests. There's a definite purpose. So as I relived some of the moments of the Walker journeys across the Cascade Mountains, I was reminded of a spiritual truth. It's amazing. When you get out in God's creation, you see Him and you learn about Him. And once those loggers would come in and they'd harvest the timber, there would be another crew of people that would go out on these mountainsides and they would replant little tiny sprigs that you think, how in the world would that ever become a tree? But amazing enough, with the right amount of time and the right care, they become harvestable trees. So there's nothing like forests that are cut down, but they provide a fresh spiritual truth, and here it is. If you harvest and you don't replant, there will be no trees in the future.
Amen.
Seems to be kind of a no-brainer, right? But there have been times that people just took and didn't replace, and it took many more years for a forest to regrow. But what's the spiritual truth in this statement? If you harvest and don't replant, there will be no harvest in the future. I once read a really cool story about family trees. And it was a guy who was an expert on family trees. Matter of fact, he made his living from them because he had inherited a German forest that had been in his family over 400 years. And the trees that he was harvested had been planted 180 years before by ancestors that he'd never met, that he never knew. Because those trees aren't ready for market until they mature. And when his great-great-grandchildren are born, if he replants, there'll be a forest for them to harvest. He's a part of a chain. He harvests trees sown from seeds by many never knew, and he plants seeds that will be harvested by his descendants he'll never see. Right, Levon? And he was dependent upon the truth of the past and responsible for the future. He was a part of a complicated chain. And guess what? So are you. We're children of the past. You all have a past. You're also grandparents of the future if you're not already there. You are heirs and benefactors and recipients of work done by people who preceded you. We're born into a forest that we didn't seed, and so here's the kicker question this morning. How's your forest looking? Think about that. Is there a spiritual question in that question? It's not just about trees. How's your forest? How's your life looking? We all have family trees. We all have family stories, and there's a lot to be learned if we take the time to study it. My brother-in-law is with me today. This is Eileen's brother, and his wife is big into family trees. And she has researched and dug in, and she can tell you everything you want to know about the Bashaw family tree or others that she's researched. And there are people that are into that. I spend a lot of my time trying to forget my family trees and all the criminals that are in it. But there's a lot to be learned. So this week I want to share with you a story about a man who must have pondered often how he would survive his family tree. Because it was horrible. And if you think you've got a bad family tree, you're going to listen to this story because his family story was tragic. His grandfather was a murderer and a mystic who sacrificed his own children in ritual abuse. His dad was a bully and a punk who ravaged churches and mocked believers and was killed by the time he was 24 by his friends. That's got to be pretty bad, Joe, when your friends come after you. These men were typical of the era in which they lived. They lived in a time when prostitutes sold their wares in churches, wizards treated diseases by chance, and people worshiped stars and followed horoscopes instead of educating their children and following God. It was a dark time to be born. And many people assumed that this young man would do nothing better than follow in the footsteps of his ancestors. You may have heard someone say to you, well, he's just like his father. Or she's just like her mom. Or, I remember Grandma acting like that, and now I see you acting. You've heard that kind of stuff, right? We are formed by those who preceded us. And this man suffered through that kind of a life. But the people were wrong. This guy wasn't set in the course of his life by his past. He reversed the trend. He defied the odds. He achieved something so remarkable that we are still telling this story over 2,600 years later. We knew this guy as King Josiah, 640 BC. Now, he was an interesting guy. Number one, he became king when he was 8 years old. That kind of tells you about a messed up system. But he was the king at 8. And the world in history has seen wiser kings, and the world has seen richer kings, and the world has seen more powerful kings. But history has never, ever seen a more creative and courageous king than young Josiah. See, he was born 600 years before Christ, and he inherited a tarnished crown. The temple at that point was a shamble. The law had been forgotten and lost. The people were worshiping whatever god they could conjure up. But at the end of Josiah's 31-year reign, 31 years was how long he was king. At the end of his reign, the temple had been rebuilt, idols had been destroyed, and the law of God was once again elevated to the place of prominence and power. Josiah's forest had been reclaimed. See how that works? His grandfather was King Manasseh. And he was remembered in 2 Kings 21:16 as the one who filled Jerusalem from one end to the other with people's blood. How's that for a family legacy? Don't want to be like Grandpa. His father, King Amon, died at the hands of his own officers. And you know what was written on his headstone as an epitaph? He did what God said was wrong. That's how his dad was remembered. But 8-year-old Josiah took the throne upon his father's death, and early in his reign he made a brave, brave choice. According to 2 Kings 22:2, it says he lived as his ancestor David had lived, and he did not stop doing what was right. He flipped through the family scrapbook, and he chose an ancestor that was worthy of emulating. Josiah skipped his dad, as would some of you. Josiah passed his grandfather, and he jumped all the way back to a king named David. We've heard of him. He's written about a lot in the book. And Josiah resolved at that point in his young life, I'm going to be like him. Not like Dad, not like Grandpa, but like his ancestor David. And the principle that you and I need to grasp is you can't choose your parents, but you can choose who you want to grow up and be like. Some of you would say, I don't want to be like my parents. So who are you going to grow up to be? That's your choice. And since Josiah had chosen David, who David, by the way, had been chosen one time, remember that? Who chose David? God. God chose David. David chose God, Josiah chose David, and things begin to happen. And we read about that in 2 Chronicles chapter 34, verses 4 through 7. It tells us that during this process, the people tore down the altars of Baal as Josiah had directed. And Josiah cut down the incense altars. He broke up the Asherah idols, and he beat them into powder. And he burned the bones of the priests. This was not what you would call a public relations tour for Josiah. But Josiah wasn't trying to get popular. He was trying to get right. He understood the word righteousness. And that's what Josiah wanted. He wasn't out to make friends and influence people. He was out to make a statement. And the statement Josiah was out to make is, what my fathers taught, I don't teach. And what they embraced, I reject. And at the age of 26, he turned his attention to that demolished temple. And he began rebuilding. And early in his reign, after he had resolved to follow his ancestor David, but now he's choosing to serve the God of someone else. In 2 Chronicles 34:8, it says this: in Josiah's 18th year as king, he made Judah and the temple pure again. He sent Shaphan to repair the temple of the Lord, the God of Josiah. He was different than his ancestors. He broke the chain. He climbed out of that family tree and planted a new one that was righteous. Now God's his God, and even more importantly, Josiah's faith is now his own. He found the God of David, and he made that God his God. And later, as the temple was being rebuilt, the workers happened upon a scroll that they found in the rubble. And it included the words God had given to Moses nearly 1,000 years earlier. And when Josiah heard that, he called for that scroll, and he read it, and he was shocked. And he wept as the people that had drifted so far away from God had once known him. And Josiah was so broken that he called a prophetess, yes, a female prophet, and he asked her, what's going to happen to our people? And she told Josiah in the book of 2 Chronicles chapter 34 that since he had repented when he heard the words that his nation would be spared the anger of God. Who would be spared? Josiah? The nation. Incredibly, because of Josiah, an entire generation received God's grace because of the integrity of one man. Don't ever tell me that you're just one person and you can't make a difference. You will make a difference in somebody's life. Might be a good difference, might be a bad difference. You get to choose. You see, God, fortunately, has not left you adrift on a sea of heredity. Your parents may have given you your genes. Your parents may have taught you some bad habits. Your parents may have given you some crummy attributes. But the truth is, God gives you life. You understand that? Some of you need to wrestle with that. Because you think you're trapped by your genetics. Your parents gave you your physical body, but God wants to take charge of your soul. And we all know what's going to happen with the physical body. Right? One day it'll be gone. But your spirit will live eternally if you make the right choice as to who you're going to follow. And if you make that choice, generations from now, I'm talking about Seraphina's grandchildren. That's hard to think about. You will never meet them. But as a result of the love that you two are pouring into that child, someday, your descendants who will never have met you and probably will have forgotten, you'll be in that box of pictures that nobody wrote who they were, and you don't have a clue. But they had to be family, so you can't throw them away. Someday you'll be in that box. But your children's will be thankful. Because generations from now, your descendants will thank God for the seeds that were sown way back in 2026. You're a seed sower right now. What are you sowing? Good seeds or knucklehead seeds? There's another message from this takeaway about trees, and I'll use this to close. If we are not about the business of planting new trees, there will come a time where there will be none for the future to harvest. And in that same way, if we refuse to plant new churches, there may not be a church for your grandchildren to attend. Chances are Mill Creek will not exist when your grandchildren's children need a church. Because churches are living organisms. We are the body of Christ. And churches are born, and churches die. And that's the way of life. So if you and I aren't about planting churches, you may be leaving your heirs an empty, clear-cut field that contains no hope and no life.
That's fine. Thank you.
If I don't want to plant new ones, someday there'll be none. And that's a very, very, very deep spiritual lesson. Because we're real comfortable. We like the church. And we think, well, why is it that we should plant a new church? Because wouldn't that be competitive with us? And when we start thinking that way, we're not understanding God. Because God is a God of planting new life in broken, arid, empty places. He did it for a lot of you. God planted seed in you, Luana. And no matter how hard we try to push it away or trim it up or cut it down, God's seed's still there. Some of you are here because of seeds that were planted by Grandma, and you never knew her. But somehow those seeds, in the midst of all the turmoil of your life, took root. And maybe as a child you know, went to vacation Bible school, or somebody took you to church, and you know, you went through the motions and you sang the songs and you knew all the things to do. But then when you were a teenager, you started thinking, you kind of walked away. And some of you have tragic stories about walking away. And the result of walking away. Not good, right, Bill? But God's seed is promised to always produce fruit if we choose to abide in Him. Anybody ever heard that? Abiding in Him? Where'd you hear it? Oh, John 15:5. And if you're not in our discipleship group, you are missing out. Or Wednesday night I talked about it. It tells us if we abide in Him, He's the vine and we're the branches. And we can't live lopped off from Him. And when we cut ourselves off, we make stupid things happen. Right, Tom? I see that head bobbing. Because apart from Him, what? You can do nothing. But with Him, you can become a fruitful producer of good fruit. And right now, the one thing that I am most proud of is, in spite of the world that I raised them in, both of my sons are following Christ in church. And all 5 of my grandchildren have learned to love Jesus. And at their stages from here to here are walking with Him. I told you a couple weeks ago, my son took the 2 oldest on a mission trip to Peru. That's a point of pride in my life.
They got an awesome dad.
Because they have an awesome dad. And he had an awesome dad, by the way. You're planting seeds. Joe, you're planting seeds. What's going to grow? Mary, you're planting seeds. What's seed in Spanish?
Semilla.
Say it again.
Semilla.
Semilla. Josh, you're planting seeds. Somebody's watching you. And somebody's eternal destiny may be dependent on you. That's a great responsibility. But that's the way God works. He does His work through His children. He has hired you to plant seeds. Don't be that guy asleep under the tree trying to collect your wages. Not planting, just hoarding. So, these are things to think about. I love this picture because there are many people planting. And there may come a day that there needs to be a new church planted. Maybe right down the road. Because new churches reach new people. And when old churches die, new churches take their place. You see how it works? Just like those forests. As I was in Oregon, I looked at those trees, and they're so big you can't even count the rings. And it's a weird thought to realize that that was planted over twice my age ago, and I'm old. But 150 years ago, somebody planted that tree. And 150 years later, somebody harvested it. And when they harvested it, they left a blank piece of soil. And if you do not replant, you waste. And that's not what we want to be. So we need to be thinking about replanting. We still got empty chairs here, Pastor. Why do we need to plant a new church? Are all your children in church? Are all your grandchildren in church? Are all your neighbors in church? And they might never come here for whatever reason. But God may have a call in their lives that needs to be fulfilled with a new church. And this isn't a sermon about planting new churches. It's a sermon about being a responsible steward of the life that God's given us and the responsibility we have to reproduce Him in this world. Because there's nothing uglier than a clear-cut forest. It's ugly. But there's nothing more beautiful than a forested mountainside. And men have learned to do that with trees. And manage it and know they know when to plant them, and how long to let them grow to get the maximum harvest. But we need that same thought process about people. How is it that we're going to grow ourselves? And we start with things like John 15:5. Do I need to give you a chance to say it? I walked up here and looked at you. Do you get the warm feeling, Shirley? Not going to ask you. But if you know it, God uses that to give you power and strength when you need it at just the right time. But if you don't know it, we're not much good. So just something to think about. We live in a forest. We're like forests. And you have ancestors that made bad decisions maybe, but you're not bound by those. Just like, what's that guy's name? King Josiah, who was born when? 640 AD, good, gold star, before Jesus. And yet look at the difference he made. Because he chose to follow the right person. You each have a choice. Who are you going to follow? Who are you following now? You know somebody in your life that you can name? And Jesus is the right answer. But we also need to have a mentor, somebody that's a little further down the road than us that we can join hands with and walk it out together. Do you have somebody like that? I mean, more importantly, are you someone like that? Do you have somebody tagging along? We're all responsible for the forest. What's yours look like? Let's pray. Father, we get so tied up in ourselves that we often forget you. And in our comings and goings, we glance at you, but we don't stop and look deep into your eyes. We don't take time to see your face. But God, just as surely as you created each one of us and you planted in our lives, through our parents, our DNA, you desire to implant a spiritual DNA into our lives so that we can grow to be like you. And for that we say thank you.